Hello, I'm David. And I guess this week I've sort of been thinking about a couple of different things. In my 20s, I moved to the Midwest. I was originally born and raised in California. I grew up in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California. And even at this point, I spent most of my life in California. Even though I'm 44 now, I will have been in the Midwest now for pretty close to 20 years. So I've been thinking about that this week, and I have two kids. My son is 9, and my daughter's 14 this year. And I've been thinking more with my daughter getting older. You can kind of see the change in her. Sort of like 1 through 9 or so are kind of like the play years. Kids really like their parents, like spending time around their parents. And as my daughter's gotten older, you could see like around 12 or so, she started developing more and more of a personality and kind of, for lack of a better word, attitude or whatnot. In the play years at that point were kind of over with. I mean, still obviously interact with her and do stuff, but it's not like, we're playing with toys and she doesn't think I'm the greatest person in the world anymore at this point. She's a teenager that finds me embarrassing in front of her friends, and typical teenager kind of, I guess. But it kind of parallels, I guess, in a way, not only, having gone through the experience myself as growing up and being a teenager and having kind of that initial existential crisis of self, or whatever you want to call it. Who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? And kind of seeing some of the same things, but now reflected in your own children as they start to grow up and get older is kind of a weird experience, I guess. But I try and appreciate the time, I suppose, especially more so now. Initially, my ex-wife and I went through a divorce, which started in 2018 and ended in 2019. And initially, I only got 3 weeks of parenting time with my kids in the summers. Now, I have half the summers, de facto, with my kids. And I appreciate having that time, being able to spend time with my kids, do things more, and just have the small interactions throughout the day of, sharing meals, doing stuff together, going for walks or going to the park, playing video games, or talking about music or books, which I kind of bring that stuff up because I had refurbished this iPod here earlier last month, and there's nothing too particularly spectacular about it. All I really replaced in the one I'm using here is the hard drive got replaced with an iFlash adapter and an SD card, and I swapped out the battery. Everything else is the original shell and faceplate and everything. The video screen. But my daughter and son had both been here, but my daughter took a liking to the iPod and wanted one of her own. So we found her an old used iPod as well, but she wanted everything replaced on it. So I swapped out the faceplate and the backplate. She wanted a red one. An iPod I had found at this antique store, the screen on it was bad, so I had to swap out the screen too. So she has a mostly fully refurbished iPod, other than the main little motherboard or logic board or whatever it is on it. And she ended up really, really enjoying it. She has a phone that she would listen to streaming music and stuff on, but she prefers the iPod because there's no interruptions or notifications or ads or anything. And she was kind of amazed to learn that the iPod originally sold for hundreds of dollars for a device that, as she said, just plays music. So the past week or so that she was here, she spent probably most of her time listening to the iPod. So it was kind of a, I guess, bonding experience or a good experience to be able to share music and stuff with my daughter and kind of get her interested in old technology, at least to some degree, and share some music and stuff with her. So I'd been doing that and thinking about my kids getting older and thinking about myself as I was that age and my own upbringing in California, and just kind of the path of life from birth to where I'm at now. And I guess life decisions I've made, choices I've made, and where they've all ultimately brought me to at this point, I suppose. I'd left in the mid-2000s, and I essentially just looked at a bunch of data, sort of cost of living analysis of the 50 states, and compared them to California. And I kind of did that because at the time, I looked around in California. I had friends that were buying houses, starting lives early off in adulthood, and everything just was so expensive. In the mid-2000s, it was, in California, and we're talking about like Central Valley, around Sacramento, Stockton, or around that area. Like a starter home was $350,000, $400,000, $450,000. And I remember at the time just thinking, that's just too much money to get a 30-year loan on and try and work my way up some corporate ladder to be able to afford this. So I started trying to find alternatives for, could I live somewhere else and try and make my lot in life a little bit easier. And I ended up essentially moving to the central United States in the Midwest. And overall, the cost of living was quite a bit cheaper. And California itself, even at the time, had, I thought, excessive laws and regulations. And it just seemed very stifling to exist anywhere in California, try and do business, try and make money, try and pay taxes, and try and own anything. So moving to the Midwest at the time seemed like a good idea to reduce costs. And so that's what I did around the mid-2000s. And then I've spent almost the next 20 years here in the Midwest. And I guess ever since the pandemic now, there's sort of been a slow ramp up at first. Maybe a little bit prior to that. But if you go back to 2019, the cost of living here in the Midwest was quite a bit cheaper than what it is now. If you look around right now, here in the central part of the United States, I'm seeing home prices, utility bills, property taxes that all kind of reflect what I would have been fleeing in the mid-2000s in California. It's something like the median price of home sales, I think, last year and this year is somewhere around $400,000. And even here in the central U.S., if you look around, probably more major metropolitan areas, you're looking at 300, 350, 400, 450. I've seen some houses, bigger homes, newer construction, larger floor plans, well into the $600,000, $700,000 range. I don't know who in the hell in the Midwest is buying $700,000 or $800,000 houses, other than maybe doctors and lawyers or professional athletes or something. But it does not seem like the median income is keeping up with the median cost of a house. So I'm not sure how a lot of people are making the math work on that. And then I've kind of been paying attention to what the Federal Reserve has been talking about, especially in this past year. I think they ended last year in December or started this year in January talking about doing multiple rate cuts. But if I'm not mistaken, they just had a recent meeting here and there haven't been any rate cuts whatsoever to speak of. It looks like potentially in September there might be like a 0.25% rate cut. And then also here recently in the past few days, the stock market looks like it's kind of fallen off a little bit of a cliff here. And then I noticed, since I work in technology and we do deal pretty directly with CrowdStrike, I had noticed, we were affected by the CrowdStrike incident. Thankfully, not that big of a deal. Any major problems I personally had with it, the backup system that I had implemented, thankfully, was pretty good. So I was able to restore any things I had issue with from critical system stuff or whatever within a few minutes. And I think I spent a couple of hours really kind of getting the worst of it dealt with. And then the rest of the day kind of double checking work and making sure systems were interoperating and connecting to each other. But anyway, that's when I started noticing after that particular event, the CrowdStrike stock price seemed to tank pretty sharply that day. And then it looks like the general stock market has kind of continued to fall in the past 2 or 3 days here. Well, leading up to the weekend. And then overall, it looks like CrowdStrike has lost like 40%, 45% of their stock value at last checking. So just all this kind of stuff seems to be happening that I saw brewing in the early 2000s. We seem to be on the precipice of all this kind of economic turmoil again here. So I've just kind of been thinking about that stuff this week and where I'm at in life and how I've been feeling and stuff at work, and then how that kind of ties in with like a reflection of my youth and growing up, and then seeing that reflected in my own children kind of going through some of the same things of growing pains or whatever you want to call it. And then here I am 30 years later than my daughter in my mid 40s, going through some sort of bizarre existential crisis again now at this point. But on top of that, I'd also, what kind of, that stuff sort of simmering in the back of my mind. And then also, I had read this. This is William Golding. If you're not familiar with Golding, he wrote, I guess one of his more popular works is Lord of the Flies. And somehow I had come across this little essay or vignette or whatever you want to call it, Thinking as a Hobby by William Golding. And I had read this sometime in my teenage years, probably not right at 14, but it probably would have been 16 or 17. And sort of the main theme in Golding's Thinking as a Hobby is he kind of recounts his early years from grade school up into college or so, I guess you would say. And he kind of recounts different people he runs into, his headmaster, some teachers, a girl he's dating, and he kind of talks about how he develops this category for organizing people into 3 categories of thinkers, level 1, 2, and 3, and he starts categorizing people into what level of a thinker they are. But he also talks about these 3 statues. He talks about the Venus de Milo, the statue, and the statue of a jaguar, and the statue of Rodin's thinker. And he talks about how he sees these statues in his headmaster's office when he's a child, and how he kind of arranges these statues facing each other, or in a particular arrangement that he finds amusing through like the lens of his childhood self. And then at the end of it, the end of the little essay that he writes, he kind of reflects back at an older age, if he could go back to the headmaster's office, and if he could rearrange those statues now, he would arrange them in a way, if I'm remembering correctly, where Rodin's thinker is looking at the Venus de Milo, and then the jaguar is posed as if it's ready to pounce and attack the thinker. So, if any of this makes any sense, the story at this point kind of makes me reflect back on my own life over time. Reevaluating experiences I've had and what they mean to me now, and what kind of influence they had on me initially, over time, and now again, looking back kind of through a glass darkly at your own life and decisions you've made, I've made, what I thought the course and path of my life would be, and instead what it's actually turned out to be, which is, I guess in some way what I'm trying to get at is a lesson that's kind of been beaten back into me, especially over the past 4 or 5 years now, ever since the pandemic kind of started, I guess, is, history doesn't repeat, it just rhymes. But I'm at this point now in my mid-40s where it feels like there's multiple things kind of simultaneously repeating. And I guess it's fair to say it's not an exact repetition of past events, but like, seeing my children and their experiences that currently are like what my experiences were for them at the same age, I'm seeing that all over again through my own eyes, but living sort of vicariously through them now experiencing that point in their lives. And then again, with kind of economic stuff that is going on currently, it's kind of just a rehash of everything leading up to the, global financial crisis that took place in the mid to late 2000s. I look around now, not only is the cost of housing at, I suppose, an all-time high, but interest rates are very high. So that kind of compounds that problem. I've noticed at work and in personal life, vendors, service providers, 10, 15, 20% increase on the same stuff we were buying just the previous year. There's more layoffs and stuff that looks like recession, but if you look at the news, nobody says the word recession. But I think it was just today or yesterday, the last couple of days somewhere, Intel announced a bunch of layoffs. And the tech sector, the pandemic took off, everybody went to work from home, and there's this big boom in the tech sector. But now in the past couple of years, last year leading into this year, there's been more and more layoffs, and the economy just looks kind of worse and worse. So just sort of thinking about all that stuff, and then, in the mid-2000s, kind of my strategy was California looks like a sinking ship. I'll just get out now, go somewhere more affordable, and just be safe and isolated from all that kind of nonsense. But now the crazy thing is, fast forward almost 20 years, and the same thing that happened in California, and if you ask me, at least from my experience, in California, it was pretty bad. During the mid-late 2000s, the cost of living and stuff, crime rate, everything kind of went up, and I bailed out, went to the Midwest. If you would have asked me in the mid-late 2000s, it was like going back in time. Sure, some things were difficult. I know the Midwest was still impacted by foreclosures, and there were some job losses and stuff. And with the whole 2008-2009 auto crisis, there were still a number of auto manufacturers kind of offset from the Detroit area that would make car parts. I worked for one of them for a few years. They, in recent years, got closed out, and I believe all the manufacturing from those plants, the plant I used to work at, went to Mexico. So while there was some of that in the late 2000s, the Midwest was at least a little bit more insulated. At least my experience moving to the Midwest was kind of like going back in time. But I look around now, and everything I saw happening in California 20 years ago now looks like it is happening nationwide. It's affecting me here where I'm at in the Midwest. So to the point where groceries are, order of magnitude, it feels like order of magnitude more expensive than 4 or 5 years ago. $100 felt like a fairly decent amount of groceries, $150. Now, I don't even fill up a grocery cart with $100 worth of food. It's a few items. It's a few items, and it's nothing particularly extravagant. You get some fruits and vegetables, and it's $100. So I've been thinking about all that stuff this week, kind of how my strategy was just to move away from all the chaos, get away from the tidal wave of financial collapse. And now here I am 20 years later, and the tidal wave is here knocking at my door again. Yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't think I have any particularly spectacular intellectual insights or anything. I just wanted to kind of talk more about myself, where I came from. I grew up in what I would call Northern California, Sierra Nevada foothills. Kind of once, in my opinion, once you kind of get north of Sacramento, there's not a whole lot in California. I know Redding's there, Chico's there, Fort Bragg, Bodega Bay, but Woodland. But once you're sort of north of Sacramento, Woodland area, it is a lot of open area. So I'm from what I would call Northern California. And about 20 years ago, I moved to the Midwest to get away from the financial collapse. And here I am 20 years later, and it looks like no one in the news seems to be saying, global financial collapse or recession or anything. In fact, you turn on the news, and they seem to tell you everyone's doing great, the economy is great, the economy is booming. I don't know where the economy is booming. If I look around locally here, it does not appear the economy is booming. I see physical stores closing. I see people shopping less. The crazy thing is, I remember being a kid in the 80s and 90s, and when we would go Christmas shopping, still one of the most popular places to go Christmas shopping was like the mall. And they'd have the anchor tenants still at the mall, like Macy's, JCPenney's, Dillard's, whatever. These big department stores. Then the mall itself would be huge. And then there'd be all the other individual stores. You could walk around the mall, do all your Christmas shopping. There'd be kiosks for video games. There'd be video game stores. Whatever it used to be, Funko Land, EB Games, GameStop, I think, was still there. But you could go in JCPenney's and buy video games. And there'd be all these displays and all these electronics, and there would be crowds of people, crowds and crowds of people shopping for everything. Now, you go into a mall, if you can find a mall anywhere. There's a couple of malls where I live, and anytime you go into them, it's empty, or nearly empty. I'm amazed Barnes & Noble is still around at this point. Go into Barnes & Noble, and Barnes & Noble is empty. Which, to some degree, I understand. I do the same thing. I shop for most anything these days, probably online more often than at a brick-and-mortar store. But you look around anywhere in the community, even in larger metro areas, and there seems to be less and less anywhere you go. And if you go outside the major metro areas, it's like most of the rural communities are kind of collapsing. Not all of them, but a whole lot of places, at least where I've been in the Midwest, and I've been to a number of states, essentially in the central United States. I've not been much in recent years over to the East Coast, But in the central U.S., a lot of the rural areas are just devoid of almost anything. And one thing I noticed is there seems to be a lot of brain drain. You know, the concept of like kids will go to college or university within their state. They'll graduate and then they'll, you know, all disperse somewhere and go to like New York, Washington, California, Florida or something. Texas is really popular now. And they'll all flee their home state. So you see a lot of population change over time, and you see all these smaller communities in the Midwest that used to have, you know, farming and agriculture is usually big, or that they would have some kind of industry or manufacturing stuff, and railroad would be big. You see all that stuff closing down and people just moving out, going somewhere else. So, I don't know. It seems like that stuff has kind of exacerbated over the past few years or so. So I'm kind of feeling a sense of, I guess, trepidation or whatever of what to expect, having seen this kind of lead up before in the past. You know, and if you look around at the market, I guess the stock market is technically kind of crashing right now, but you see overinflated stocks, overinflated home prices, overinflated car prices. At some point, you would think that bubble has to kind of burst, and then what happens? Are we going to have a collapse worse than, you know, 2006, 7, 8, 9? Is it going to be worse than that? Is it going to be better? Are there going to be major job losses? What's going to happen? No, it's an election year. So what are we going to get this year for the so-called October surprise? So yeah, that's it, I guess. Just my experiences over the past week, thinking about my own life and upbringing, and then seeing kind of experiences I had in life reflected through my own children kind of growing up now, and then the reflection of, you know, the economy and finances and taxes and the monetary policy and everything kind of, I guess, looking like it's culminating in some sort of a perfect storm again. So we're going to have an issue in 2024, 2025, 2026, or what exactly is going to happen. But anyway, I guess that's probably all I have this week. Just me alone in a dark room talking to myself again. Hope you found some value or interest during this, or at least amused or something. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.